The dull roar of boarding announcements echoed faintly through the cabin, blending with the clatter of overhead bins and the rustle of coats and carry-ins. Henry settled deeper into his first-class seat, the leather cool against his hoodie. He adjusted his sunglasses, not because he needed them, but because they helped him disappear. From the outside, he looked like any man in his late 30s, casual, unbothered, hands resting calmly on his lap. Inside, though, he carried a trained awareness that never slept. Every cough, every hurried footstep down the aisle, every tense murmur reached him in sharp detail. Years of discipline had carved his senses into tools sharper than any knife. The plane was nearly full now, passengers shuffling past with their usual blend of fatigue and excitement. Henry had chosen his seat deliberately, second row, perfect sight lines across the cabin. The faint aroma of fresh coffee drifted from the galley, mixed with the antiseptic tang of recycled air. For him, it was just another day at work, another flight to oversee quietly, without anyone realizing what he truly was. Then came the voice that cut through the atmosphere like broken glass. Excuse me. Can you not bump into me? God, some people have no sense of personal space. The woman's tone arrived before she did. Passengers glanced back, shoulders stiffening as if bracing for a storm. She was large, commanding space in every direction, with long, wavy hair that had the unnatural shine of too much product. A flowing light purple dress clung around her frame, patterned with dark lines that made her look like a misplaced curtain. She toted a glittering designer purse that swung dangerously close to heads as she pushed forward. Jacqueline, 40 years old, and used to rooms bending around her voice. The kind of passenger crew members prayed wouldn't sit in their section. She stopped abruptly in the aisle, eyes narrowing at Henry. Her gaze traveled from his sneakers to his hoodie to the sunglasses that reflected her furious face back at her. She blinked once, then her lips curled into a sneer. Oh, no. This can't be right. Her voice was sharp enough to slice the hush that fell over nearby rows. People like you don't sit in first class. The words dropped into the space like stones into still water. A few heads turned quickly away, passengers pretending not to listen, though every ear was tuned in. Henry didn't move. He simply exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that steadied storms behind his glasses, his eyes locked on her without a flicker. Jacqueline planted herself directly in front of a seat, one hand gripping the headrest of the chair across the aisle. Stewardess, she barked, raising her arm as though hailing a cab. Yes, over here. You've made a mistake. This man doesn't belong here. He's clearly in the wrong seat. The flight attendant approached carefully, her professional smile stretched thin but intact. Mom, can I see your boarding pass, please? Not mine. Jacqueline said, stabbing her finger at Henry like she was accusing him of theft. Check his ticket. I've flown first class for years, and I know what the clientele looks like. And it's not this. Henry shifted, leaning forward just enough to hand over his stub. His movements were unhurried, deliberate. The attendant scanned it, then returned it with a polite nod. He's exactly where he should be, ma'am. The confirmation didn't settle her. If anything, it fueled her. Her nostrils flared, her voice rising. Well, then, standards have really dropped. I paid for peace in class, not to sit next to. She stopped, her eyes narrowing into slits. Whatever this is, a ripple of discomfort passed through the row. A man across the aisle coughed pointedly. A young woman with earbuds shook her head, muttering something under her breath. But no one openly confronted Jacqueline. Not yet. Henry stayed still, his face unreadable, though every instinct screamed at him to end the disruption before it worsened. Training told him patience would yield more than confrontation. So he simply leaned back, folding his arms, and let her burn through her fuel. Jacqueline crossed her arms too, mirroring him, but with hostility radiating from every pore. Fine, she announced loudly, ensuring the entire cabin could hear. If the crew refuses to keep order, then I'll make sure everyone here knows the truth. People like him, by last-minute upgrades, sneak their way into spaces meant for hard-working, respectful travelers. It's disgraceful. Her voice climbed with each word, riding on indignation like a wave that threatened to crash. A baby cried somewhere in economy. A man tugged his newspaper higher to shield his view. Phones glowed in quiet hands. Passengers already recording, already documenting. Henry felt the weight of every eye flick toward him, judging, waiting. He could end it with a sentence. He could flash the badge tucked neatly away in his pocket, drop his cover, silence her theatrics, but not yet. There was value in letting her reveal herself fully, in letting her arrogance paint the target more vividly than he ever could. The flight attendant leaned in, lowering her voice. Mayim, I need you to take your seat so we can prepare for takeoff. Jacqueline huffed, rolling her eyes so hard it seemed they might get stuck. I'll sit. But this isn't over. She turned back toward Henry, leaning close enough that her perfume, sickly sweet, drowning in floral notes, pushed into his nostrils. I'll make sure everyone here knows exactly what kind of man you are. Her words lingered in the air like smoke. Passengers exchanged looks, a mixture of pity and curiosity aimed at Henry, but he didn't flinch, didn't rise to her bait. Instead, he lowered his sunglasses just enough for her to see the calm steel in his eyes. His lips curved into the faintest trace of a smile, so quick and subtle it could have been imagined. Then the glasses slid back into place, walling off his expression once more. Jacqueline recoiled slightly, unsettled by his composure before she spun and stomped toward her seat. The leather squeaked as she dropped heavily into it, muttering loud enough for half the cabin to hear. The engines hummed louder. The cabin lights dimmed slightly, signaling takeoff was near. Yet, the tension hadn't left. It hung in the space between rows, electric and waiting. Henry flexed his hands once, loosening the stiffness in his knuckles, and leaned back against the headrest. He could feel eyes still on him, wondering who he really was, why he hadn't cracked under Jacqueline's attack. And as the seat belt sign chimed, Jacqueline leaned forward from across the row, her eyes glittering with the promise of more chaos. "Fine," she said again, her voice a venomous whisper. "No, if the airline won't do something about you, I will." Henry turned his head slowly, regarding her through the dark glass of his shades. The cabin vibrated with the rising thrust of the engines, but the moment between them felt frozen. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His silence said enough, and in that silence a storm waited to break. The plane lifted off the runway with a roar, engines straining before settling into their steady climb. Seatbelts clicked, trays rattled, and the cabin pressed back against its passengers as gravity surrendered. Henry sat still, unbothered by the shift in force. His hands folded neatly in his lap. Across the row, Jacqueline fumbled with her belt, huffing loudly as if the very physics of flight had inconvenienced her personally. Almost as soon as the seat belt light dimmed, she snapped her fingers at the nearest flight attendant. "Wine! A big one, and don't bring me the cheap stuff." The attendant forced a smile, scribbling down the order, and hurried away. Jacqueline leaned back with a dramatic sigh, eyes darting toward Henry, waiting for him to look at her. He didn't. His gaze remained on the aisle, calm, assessing. Moments later, the glass of red arrived, and Jacqueline took it like a weapon, holding it high before taking an exaggerated sip. Finally. At least the service knows who the paying customers are. She spoke loudly enough that the Rosa had turned slightly, trying not to be obvious. Henry's ears caught everything. The way her words landed, the restless shifting of nearby passengers, the hushed whispers building just out of sight. His role wasn't simply to watch. It was to understand when a threat transformed from nuisance to danger. And Jacqueline, with her slurred confidence and growing restlessness, was edging steadily toward that line. It didn't take long. By the second glass, her voice had grown louder. She jabbed her fork at the small meal tray, complaining the pasta was overcooked, that the bread roll was as hard as a rock. She waved down the attendant again, this time demanding another pour, her cheeks flushed deep pink, her hair frizzing as she leaned closer to Henry. "You think you're fooling anyone sitting there all quiet?" She sneered, her words coated with a sharpness of alcohol. "I know your type, trying to act like you belong, but you don't. Not in first class, not anywhere near people like me." Henry turned his head slowly, just enough to acknowledge her without granting her the satisfaction of a full reply. Behind his glasses, his eyes swept her posture, her hands the subtle sway in her seat. Intoxicated, volatile, unpredictable, a dangerous combination in a pressurized metal tube 30,000 feet above ground. Passengers nearby grew visibly uncomfortable. A young man across the aisle tilted his phone subtly, the camera angled toward Jacqueline. A woman in the row behind whispered to her partner, "This is getting out of hand." Henry caught every glance, every nervous shuffle. The tension was no longer private. The whole cabin was beginning to feel it. The flight attendant approached again, crouching to Jacqueline's level. Voice hushed but firm. "Mom, I need you to lower your voice. Other passengers are becoming uncomfortable." Jacqueline scoffed, nearly spilling her drink as she waved her arm. "Uncomfortable because of me." "No, sweetheart, they're uncomfortable because of him." She jabbed her finger toward Henry, nearly tipping her glass onto his lap. "This man doesn't belong here, and I'm the only one willing to say it." The attendant's jaw tightened, but she nodded carefully and retreated. For now, Henry remained motionless, his breathing steady, though his mind ran sharp and precise. This wasn't just an obnoxious traveler. This was someone spiraling toward disruption that could compromise the entire flight. He could step in now, reveal himself in the charade. But training demanded restraint. Let her show her hand fully. Let her lose every ounce of credibility before the reveal. Jacqueline wasn't finished. She leaned forward, blocking Henry from reclining his seat, her palm pressing firmly against the headrest. "Don't even think about getting comfortable," she hissed. "I'm not letting you ruin my flight." The nearby phones caught everything, the trembling wine glass in her hand, the angry flush creeping across her face, the complete calm of the man she targeted. The contrast was cinematic, almost too perfect to be real. Henry didn't resist. He simply folded his hands tighter, a picture of composure, letting her effort look ridiculous. The more she pushed, the more she exposed herself. Around them, murmurs grew. Someone whispered, "She's out of control." Another muttered, "Unbelievable." Jacqueline turned at the sound, her voice spiking. "Oh, don't pretend you're not thinking it too. He doesn't belong here. He should be back in coach with the rest of them." She pointed toward the curtain that divided first class from economy, her finger trembling with rage and alcohol. The attendant returned firmer this time. "Mom, please sit down properly. If you continue harassing passengers, I'll have to escalate this." "Escalate." Jacqueline barked, laughing. "Cry. Oh, honey, escalate all you want. I have rights. I paid for this seat and I won't be quiet until you do your job and move him." Her voice carried through the cabin, slicing the air. A baby cried again in the back, the sound mingling with a low hum of engines. Passengers were filming openly now, phones raised without shame. The story was writing itself in shaky video clips, ready to go viral. Henry shifted slightly, adjusting his glasses, his expression as unreadable as ever. Inside, his decision sharpened like a blade. She had crossed from nuisance to threat. Not a threat in the sense of weapons or violence, but one of escalating instability that could tip the entire flight into chaos. His duty was clear. The only question was when. Jacqueline's third glass of wine disappeared in a gulp. She slammed it onto the tray so hard the stem cracked. A fine line running through the glass. She rose unsteadily to her feet, swaying as the plane jolted lightly in turbulence. "That's it," she roared, her voice carrying over the engines. "If no one will stop him, I will." The flight attendant lunged forward, hands up. "Mom, please sit down now." But Jacqueline ignored her, pointing directly at Henry, finger trembling with fury. "You get up, you don't belong here." Gasps rippled through the rows. The phone zoomed closer, passengers leaning to catch every word, every move. The tension reached a knife's edge. Henry slowly removed his sunglasses, folding them with deliberate precision before placing them on the tray. His eyes, revealed at last, were cold and controlled, a steel blue that cut through Jacqueline's drunken haze. He rose from his seat with calm authority, his movements sending a ripple of silence across the cabin. Jacqueline faltered, stepping back half a pace, wine sloshing dangerously close to her hand. The crew hovered, torn between intervention and shock. Henry's voice was low, steady, carrying weight that silenced the row around him. "Sit down, ma'am." The moment froze, suspended in the humming cabin. Jacqueline blinked, her bravado flickering, though her mouth opened as if to snap back. Every passenger leaned in, waiting to see what would come next. Jacqueline's mouth twisted as if she might spit venom, but the sight of Henry standing there, towering yet composed, drained some of the bravado from her eyes. The cabin was silent now, the only sounds the deep hum of the engines and the faint rattle of turbulence. Every passenger watched, phones raised like 100 unblinking witnesses. Jacqueline's hand shook, her wine glass tilting dangerously before she slammed it onto the tray with a clatter. "Don't you tell me what to do," she hissed, but her voice had lost its edge. Henry's gaze didn't waver. "Ma'am, sit down." Now, the authority in his tone sent a ripple through the crowd. Even the attendants froze, sensing something unusual in his delivery. Jacqueline looked around as if searching for an ally, but all she saw were cameras pointed at her, faces hardened with judgment. She tried to laugh it off, a brittle, nervous sound. "Who do you think you are? Some kind of cop?" Henry reached into the inner pocket of his hoodie with deliberate calm and pulled out his badge. The silver gleam caught the overhead light, reflecting into eyes wide with disbelief. His voice was quiet, yet it filled the cabin like thunder. "Air Marshal, and you just made a very serious mistake." The gasp that swept through the rows was almost theatrical. Passengers murmured, some audibly whispering, "I knew it or she's finished." Jacqueline staggered back into her seat as if the badge itself carried weight, her face draining of color, her lips parted, then closed again, words failing her for the first time since boarding. The lead flight attendant, now emboldened, stepped forward. "Sir, how would you like us to proceed?" Henry didn't break his stare from Jacqueline. "She's harassed passengers, disobeyed crew instructions, and endangered flight safety. Secure her." The attendants moved swiftly, retrieving the restraint straps kept for unruly passengers. Jacqueline tried to rise again, sputtering excuses. "Wait, no. This is all a misunderstanding. I didn't mean he provoked me." But the rang hollow in the air, thick with her earlier tirade. Passengers cheered softly, some clapping, others muttering about time. Cameras captured every second as the attendants fastened her wrists to the armrests, her protests dwindling into pitiful lines. She twisted in her seat, hair sticking to her damp forehead, mascara beginning to streak. Henry sat back down, retrieving his sunglasses with slow precision, as if reclaiming his calm. He slid them onto his face and leaned against the leather, the picture of composure around him. The tension cracked into relief. A man across the aisle whispered, "Thank you," while another passenger muttered, "Best flight ever." Jacqueline's voice broke the moment, rising in desperation. "You can't do this to me. Do you know who I am? I'll sue." Henry tilted his head, his voice carrying cool finality. "My entitlement doesn't exempt you from the law. Sit quietly or things will only get worse." The camera zoomed in on her, then catching her stunned silence, her eyes darting in frantic calculation. For the first time, Jacqueline had no script, no audience to dominate, only witnesses to her downfall. The hours that followed passed in uneasy quiet. Jacqueline shifted restlessly in her restraints, muttering under her breath. But she never rose again. Flight attendants avoided her glare, focusing instead on the grateful passengers who thanked them for restoring order. Henry remained calm, sipping water, occasionally scanning the cabin with trained eyes, though he knew the crisis had already resolved itself. As the plane descended, the captain's voice filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be landing shortly. Please remain seated until we reach the gate." But everyone knew the landing wouldn't be ordinary. The wheels touched down with a jolt, tires screeching faintly before the brakes steadied. The moment the plane slowed, Jacqueline began pleading, her voice trembling now. "Please, I didn't mean it. I was just stressed. You understand, right?" Henry didn't respond. He adjusted his watch, his silence cutting deeper than words. When the doors opened, uniformed airport security entered briskly, their presence undeniable. Passengers craned their necks to watch. The officers went straight to Jacqueline, ignoring her sputtering protests as they unlocked her restraints, only to replace them with steel handcuffs. Gasps and murmurs followed the metallic click. "No, this isn't fair. He set me up." Jacqueline shrieked, but her words were drowned beneath the sound of passengers applauding. Dozens of phones recorded her red face, her frantic eyes, her flailing as the officers marched her down the aisle. Henry didn't rise. He remained seated, letting the scene unfold, the corners of his lips curling ever so slightly at the justice served. As Jacqueline disappeared through the cabin doors, he finally stood, collecting his small carry-on. Passengers turned to him, some whispering, "Thanks," others smiling with relief. A young woman leaned over, her phone still in hand. "You were incredible. Everyone's going to see this?" Henry offered the faintest nod, his voice steady. Entitlement always exposes itself. "I just let her do the work." He stepped in the aisle, the glow of phones still following him, though none dared intrude further. He walked through the jet bridge like any other passenger, blending into the flow, the badge already tucked away to the world outside. He was just a man in a hoodie and sunglasses vanishing into the crowd. But the story didn't vanish. Within hours, the footage spread across social media. Clips of Jacqueline's tirade and her humiliation under the Marshal's authority, racking up millions of views. Comment sections filled with cheers, jokes, and the inevitable chorus, "Karma delivered." Somewhere in a quiet corner of the airport, Henry sat with a cup of coffee, scrolling through the headlines. He read none of them with more than passing interest. Justice had been served. That was enough. As he finished his drink, his phone buzzed with a message from his supervisor. "Good work. Stay sharp. Another flight tomorrow." Henry smiled faintly, sliding a phone back into his pocket. The world was full of Jacquelines, each convinced their voice ruled above all others. His job was to ensure they never endangered the innocent. He stood, moving toward the exit, blending again into anonymity. Passengers from his flight pointed him out quietly, whispers trailing after him, but he walked on without pause. Behind him, Jacqueline's cries would echo in courtrooms and headlines for weeks. Ahead, another flight waited. Another cabin full of strangers unaware of the man quietly watching over them. Justice had been delivered here, but Henry knew it was only one story among many. And as the terminal lights gleamed across his sunglasses, he walked forward into the noise of the airport, ready for whatever came